Welcome to the Bitcoin Infinity Show, brought to you by Bitbox, Stampseed, the Bitcoin Advisor, and ShopInBit. Go to bitcoininfinity.com for books, merch, and more. Enjoy the conversation.
Rigel, welcome to the Bitcoin Infinity Show.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, it's finally.
Yeah, I think we talked about this maybe like 2 years ago or something. You were like, want to do this, and just I think too busy doing different things and never happened, right?
Yeah. But we figured we did an in-person one, because I remember the first time I saw you back in 2019, my first time here, and the starting gun for me for all of this crazy life that has followed on later. So here's this guy on stage playing death metal songs for finance and nerd people. So it's I thought it was absolutely awesome. So
Thanks.
I'm not the only metalhead in here.
I remember when I put that in the presentation, I was like, "Is this going to go down? How is this going to go down?" Right? And then everyone clapped after I played that video. I was like, "Oh,
no, it was super based."
Thank you.
What's the name of your band again?
So I play in a band called Diocletian. I used to play in a band called Dawn of Azazel, but the band I play in now is a band called Diocletian, which is I guess you would call it the, metal. It's got a zillion subgenres and stuff, but you would call it war metal, I guess.
War metal.
War metal is the thing, right? Yeah, so yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
And what's your story? Give our listeners your story. Who are you, and what turned you on to death metal, and what turned you on to Bitcoin? And is there a connection between the two and all of that?
Oh my God. Okay, this is a very long-winded. How do I summarize this pretty well? Okay, so I'm Rigel Walshe. I go by CoinSharenZ on Twitter and Telegram and a lot of these kind of platforms. I've played music and stuff since I was 17 years old. I've been in a band where, I'm from New Zealand. That's where that was from. We were the first metal band to ever get out of the country, really, and play even Australia, let alone Europe and the States and things like that. So, we did quite a few, 4 albums, I think it was, with my old band, Dawn of Azazel, before we split up. Never really massively big, but in New Zealand, quite a bit bigger than we were outside of it, and certainly Europe or the States. The same time when I turned 21, I joined the police. I was in the police for 10 years at the same time as this was going on. And if you search my name, you'll find some interesting news reports about some trouble I had for that kind of reason. So that's maybe my background with that part. We'll shift forward to maybe when I first got into Bitcoin in 2014. And so for me, what got me interested in Bitcoin was, as I said, I used to be in the police. And one day, I think I heard of Bitcoin thrown around. I just dismissed it. I thought this new money. I didn't realize or think that it was interesting, right? But I was reading a news article about the Silk Road trial, and this is when Ross Ulbricht was getting sentenced. And this is after I left the police and things like this. And it just blew my mind when I read that. It's because I think most people don't really or didn't or can't quite grok maybe the way that it hits me, in the sense of you had this drug market selling whatever you liked, under the eyes of the FBI and all these guys, and there was nothing they could do for years. And I was like, wow, man, this is going to be straight away. I thought this is how Russia and North Korea are going to get around sanctions and stuff. It seems they are doing today, So to me, this is nuclear weapons grade money. So my interest actually was in Bitcoin, but also in the darknet markets. I just got on there and had a look, and I bought a few things and stuff and had hunt around. That was what really interested me. But of course, most people that play around the darknet markets, you start, okay, what is this Bitcoin thing that I'm using and sending, and start looking into it. And I'd never been a finance kind of guy. I mean, like I said, I joined the police relatively early on. They got a very good superannuation scheme where you put in $1, the government puts in $2. And so to me, I'd looked at investing in shares and things a couple of times, and it made sense because I've got the best. There's no better place that I could do is just put more money in that fund that the government will match dollar for dollar, right? So this is the first time I ever looked at anything really about investing. And, and obviously as you start thinking about this, at that time when I got into Bitcoin and bought my stuff, it was around $200, just right at the end of the 2014 kind of crash. And, at the time I thought wow, man, this might be worth $1,000 some years later, right? So I started putting pretty much everything I had, which at the time was not a lot because this was after I left the police and I actually quite a bit of trouble transitioning from that into like some sort of civilian career. I was like, found it quite hard to find like work. And so I was working self-employed, didn't have a lot of money, but I put everything I had into Bitcoin because to me, it just made total sense. So yeah, that was 2014. Obviously fast forward a couple of years, 2017 is around and now Bitcoin is close to 20 grand. You know, I've got lots of, I'm fucking rich, you know. So what I did is I was like, I spent so much time thinking and talking about Bitcoin. I really want to get involved in the space, but you know what? I'm not a software developer. What can I do? So I actually ended up buying some Trezors, and just through good luck, when I bought them, Bitcoin was around 10K, and I bought like something like I think 200 or something Trezors and Ledgers, and I sold all of them in a month in New Zealand, which is a tiny country, you know, which blew my mind, right? So then that happened, and this was like February, and I remember it was December, I had massive orders, January petered off, and then like February, there was just nothing, and yeah, the price is going down, and the thing, you know, so I was just in the right place at the right time and got lucky, and I had all this money out of this, and it was in a business account that I'd have to pay taxes on, obviously, if I didn't get rid of it, right? So my thing is, well, I could pay myself a salary and pay tax on it, but what's smarter is, how can I use this money to make the next step and jump to the next thing? So I thought, well, let's go to a bunch of Bitcoin conferences and see if there's any match for my kind of skills, right? So I'd never gone to, I've been to like meetups in New Zealand, but I had no idea like what they really looked like out there in the real world, right? So I went to went to like an Australian blockchain one, which was like just total trash. And then I went to, Token 2049. You heard of that one? It's like still going. It's like a real shitcoin kind of conference thing. There was
Rings a tiny bell.
What's that?
Rings a tiny bell. Yes.
And it was in Hong Kong or something, right? And I remember I went to that and it was cool, right? But it was still, I was still in this world where, obviously I was familiar with Bitcoin, but I dabbled with, altcoins and stuff like this. And perhaps the way that you or I would look at Bitcoin now, I think was still quite a new idea in those times, right? There wasn't this really well nuanced ideology about how to view this kind of stuff. So I went there and I was kind of figuring this out. And this is cool, but it feels a little kind of creepy, sleazy. The next one I went to was like Consensus in New York, which was at the time, that was the biggest Bitcoin crypto conference you would say ever. And there was like 3,000 people or something. And I remember at that conference, I was like, there was a lot of, all sorts of Ethereum and things there, right? But there was a Blockstream room at this conference. And I remember I felt like, man, this place feels so sleazy and so dirty and everyone seems like super sketchy. But then you go to the Blockstream room and I was like, these are the guys that, I just clicked, like when you meet them and you see this. And so I think this is a really important thing for people that don't go to conferences, that when you come, like a lot of this stuff, when you just see it with your own eyes and talk to people directly, it makes a lot more sense than online. So I went to that. And then I met, what's his name? Eric. The last name escapes you, but he works on Bitcoin Fabric, used to be at Blockstream. He told me, go to Building on Bitcoin and go to Honeybadger. And so from there, I started going to conferences. When I went to Building on Bitcoin, I kind of talked about this in my talk today. It was like I wasn't a software developer, but I saw Adam Fiskor and Nicolas Doria presented Wasabi and BTC Pay Server. And I realized like, wow, man, I thought before that Bitcoin software development's all about like some supercomputer nerd guys and like Bitcoin Core and only this real high level stuff. But I realized, man, these guys just made their own app on Bitcoin that really made a real difference. And wow, I could do that if I really put my mind to it. So I came back straight away, got into a Python coding course, and just like really, really luckily, I went really crazy on this. And then come December, Jimmy Song came to Australia to do the programming blockchain, or whatever called programming Bitcoin course. I applied and got on that. And I was really out of my depth, but I managed to keep up enough to write it. And so this was like maybe 6 months after, 6 months ago, I didn't know anything about like coding or anything like that. And so just by pure luck also, I was really relatively well networked in the New Zealand, Auckland Bitcoin scene. And I went to a meetup and there was a guy there who I knew kind of loosely, that I knew had a really small exchange in New Zealand. And I was talking about, and he's like, oh, what have you been doing? I was like, oh, I was just building this API in Python. It's like, oh, we're building out our API. Do you want to come and help? And I was like, yeah. So at the time I was working a job where I'm working 4 days a week and I had the Mondays off. And so I just started working there on Mondays and then split with the ex-girlfriend. and I was really happy in New Zealand and felt like I've really got to get out of here, right? So I was thinking, even if I have to like sell Bitcoin to leave, I've just really got to get out of New Zealand because I feel like there's just no future for me here. So I said to them, okay, look, hey, I had a friend that was living in Bali. I said, look, hey, I'm moving to Bali. I really don't want to leave this job, and I really appreciate what you give me, but I've got to do this. If you let me work remote, I would really happily work remote, but I understand if you don't. And they're like, sure, yeah, have a full-time job. So I did that, started doing that. COVID happened, ended up in Mexico as a cause of that. And for the Jimmy Songs course, it's like an alumni Telegram group. Jan Pritzker jumped in there and he said, like, hey, we're looking for developers at Swan. And, and I said, hey, I do that. And the tech stack was very similar to what I was already working on. And I got a job there. And so for the last, up until 3 weeks ago, I was working at Swan for 3.5 years. I think it was employee number 10 or 11 or something there. And that's pretty much it. I think that's long thing, but I think I covered all the bases there. And now I give some talks at conferences here.
Yeah, it's a great story. And there are many similarities to mine. Like I also have experience of a shitcoin conference before I went to Riga in 2019. But were you here in 2018?
Yeah, that was the first, because when I met Eric, he told me building on Bitcoin and then Honeybadger, the ones. So I pretty much, that was the last of the company money, was that one there. And that one they were talking about HCPP. And I was like, oh, can I go to that? But it was just flying home to New Zealand, which is like a 2-day journey, then coming back 2 weeks later and paying for all the stuff. I didn't manage to make it. But like that was the first time, the last conference I went to that thing. And that really, it was an amazing conference. So this has always been an amazing conference.
I saw your talk here last year, and it was really, really good, like awesome, about Bitcoin cultures, right? And different subcultures and what these subgroups and what happens in a decentralized system. And also, like we've been chatting during this conference about these effects, like how we find our own in-groups and how people cling on to the extremes here and there. And can you expand a bit on that? And what do you think is missing from conferences in general? And what makes Honeybadger stick out as a high signal one and all of that?
So 3 questions here. So to talk about the talk, it's called Bitcoin Psychopaths versus Bitcoin Sociopaths. And if you Google it, you can find the written thing and the video and view itself. But basically, what I talked about is, to return to my story, right? When I started coming to these conferences, I realized how much the Bitcoin world had in common with the music world, in the sense of the personalities, the little subgroups, the way that things evolved. Like I just saw a lot of things that clicked, because to me, really, like Bitcoin is like a Harley Davidson for computer nerds, right? It's like this kind of like subculture that people are involved in. And I feel like a lot of people who are in Bitcoin, like I have this experience of being these weird kind of outside groups and how this works. I think a lot of people that are in Bitcoin, this is the first kind of really out there, different thing they've had in their life. And they're like blows their mind. They're like, wow, this is so cool. They don't realize how a lot of these idiosyncrasies are very much the same. I'd imagine the same if you're like a Trekkie or you're into something like that. There's a lot of the same sort of politics, right? So the talk is really talking about how Bitcoin, in my opinion, is like a subculture or a counterculture, the same way that metal music would be an example. But there's plenty of things like this where people have a niche interest, but it's also kind of a little bit against society, right? If you know what I mean. The whole idea of Bitcoin is you're trying to defund the state, and so it's kind of like it's not like a really dangerous out there kind of thing, but the kind of thing that's based on is not like it's not in total alignment with society, I think, right?
Inherently contrarian.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Which it does attract a lot of contrarians, right? So the whole talk was looking at, okay, if you look at subcultures, how do they get involved or immersed in the traditional system, right? There's plenty of things. Let's take rap music, for example, where you had Dr. Dre in NWA, and now he's like, selling Beats headphones and a very nice commercial established businessman, right? Or another good one that I like to use, like weed or like the gay community, right? At one point, these are very out there things, and now they're very normal and very accepted. And they're almost forced on you, right? In a lot of ways, as opposed to like being an outcast. So, when things become normalized and when they get bigger and bigger and bigger, if they catch on, eventually they kind of get watered down as they get integrated into society. And the same thing I think is already happening in Bitcoin, and it's affecting the culture of Bitcoin. And I don't think you can really change that. It's inevitable. But it's something that I think we need to discuss and look at, okay, well, if you take some of these other things there, how they lost what made them powerful and transformative in the first place, because they were kind of revolutionary movements, right? And they got watered down and commercialized, right? So I think the same thing is happening to Bitcoin right now, and you can't really stop it. This is, if you just look at history, this is what happens. But there is a conversation to be had about how can we navigate this as best as we can, right? So that's more or less a summary of that kind of talk and what that was about.
Great news, everyone! Bitcoin, the Inverse of Clown World, is out now.
It's the successor to Everything Divided by 21 Million, and it's based on the last 2 years of podcasts that we've done together. So if you like the show, you're going to love the book.
Find the book on bitcoininfinitystore.com or on Amazon.
That's right. We have our own store now, bitcoininfinitystore.com. You can find not just books, but merchandise based on Everything Divided by 21 Million, the Inverse of Clown World. That's bitcoininfinitystore.com.
So check out Bitcoin, the Inverse of Clown World today and buy some other stuff while you're there too.
This show is brought to you by Bitbox, our favorite hardware wallet. It's Swiss engineered and has all the most important security features to keep your Bitcoin safe, while keeping a user experience that even your grandma can use. So visit bitbox.swiss/freedom to learn more, or use code FREEDOM at checkout for 5% off. And remember, it's the BitBox 02 Bitcoin Only edition. Make sure to get that Bitcoin Only firmware.
Bitbox.
Now, what was the...
Yeah, what was the other two bits of a long question?
Maybe we can just stay on.
Are you asking about conferences? Like you said, like what I think about Bitcoin conferences and what I think like about Honeybadgers. Well, what I like about Honeybadger is that, like, I think nowadays the conference thing, going to speak to what I just was talking about, right? As this gets bigger, it becomes more commercial and things get kind of watered down for people that are casual participants, right? The people early on in the movement, like, if you're there in 2017, 2018, you're really hardcore, right? But if you look at the way they're doing, say, Bitcoin Nashville at the moment, like, it's a very different thing. It's very not watered down, very commercial and very one-minded, right? And what I like about Honeybadger and what I have so much respect for with this conference is that they seem to, at least, I've never had this conversation directly, but this is my impression, is that, remember in 2019, that was the biggest Bitcoin conference in the world, and I think there was probably 600, 800 people, right? And, things have got bigger and stuff since then, and maybe, this could have been a bigger conference. I mean, certainly you would imagine it could have been as big as, say, BTC Prague is, right? But they seem to have had the idea of, like, let's just keep it at a particular level and not go too far and too hard, because in my humble opinion, I think, like, the Bitcoin Nashville conference is an absolute abomination. It's a circus, you know what I mean? And it's all there just to, like, make it as loud and big as possible, but what is the message that is getting diluted and what is getting presented to these newcomers there is, to me, is very much getting away from what I believe the message of Bitcoin should be, right? Or at least it's not even a very nuanced message, no matter what it is, right?
It's inflation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but this is exactly, it's dilution, inflation. It's the same thing as when it happens to your money, it happens to culture. I mean, I've never thought about that, but that's a very good way to phrase it, I think. So, when it comes to conferences, I was just saying this before, is beyond the fact of just making it big and watering it down, the other thing I think is, like, the narrative is very, very stale, right? It's all still is and has been for, ever since 2018, 2019, it's all about sound money and the moneyness of Bitcoin, right? Which, of course, it is. And, it's, in my opinion, the best money in the world. But I think, we've still met those arguments pretty well by this point, right? There's so much stuff that's been written, but I think it is really good stuff, right? They're all good messages, but they've been said, they're done, they're written, right? And you don't want to hear the same guys giving the same talk every year over and over, which is what these conferences are. I think it's like the Rolling Stones, playing their greatest hits, right? The Rolling Stones have some really amazing songs, but if you've gone and seen them play live, playing the greatest hits 10 times, I think I'll skip it this year, right? So to what I see happening here, a little, and that I think I just can't believe this isn't more of a thing, is like, if you want this movement to succeed, and you as a conference promoter want people to come to your conferences, you got to keep it new and interesting and shift things up, right? And so you got to find people out there in the community out there who aren't speaking at conferences, aren't big, aren't famous, right? If we return the analogy of like a music festival, there's bands that aren't known, but if you gave them a chance and used your festivals as a way to expose them to more people, they could get bigger. And it's in your interest, because if you're having the same bands play every year, people don't want to come to your festival again. But if you can help this new blood come up then it's in your interest because you can put them on the stage and you can bring people to your event, right? And I think the same thing should be done for this. I mean, obviously, I think it should be done for the good of Bitcoin, right? It's not just the moneyness. There's many different aspects to Bitcoin. It's a very interesting, I say it's like a Rorschach test, right? Like what you see in the ink blot reflects more about you and I, but we could look at the same thing and see two totally different things, right? So I think it's in the interest of Bitcoin to get people to flesh these narratives and give them an opportunity to do it and to get it out in people's heads and for them to hear this. But it's also in the interest of them as like conference promoters. Like I said, if it's just the same people all the time, it's going to peter out. And I feel like Honeybadger is one of the few places that's trying to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, in my perspective, Honeybadger 2 years ago was my first ever conference, right? And so, I mean, that's already my newness in the space compared to you guys, but still, Honeybadger has been fantastic for me from that perspective, and like the signal, that's the focus. But we talked to Max Kai about this not long ago, about how is the Latvian community doing, and Honeybadger hasn't really focused on growing the local community. It's bringing the signal into one place and everyone learn from each other and all this, and it's a fantastic event for Bitcoin. But that's one style of conference. And then there's these other ones that are all about, I mean, the American ones, especially like the Nashvilles and all this, those are, these entertainment fests and all this. And I think they've also brought this to Amsterdam here in Europe. But I think Prague and Madeira here this last year were both examples of conferences that went a bit bigger, but have also have a layer of the local adoption. And I think those types of conferences are important for a different reason. Like the one that Bulgaria is the example that I use a lot, but they do a good thing there to build the local adoption, and so get some speakers, get some international presence to sort of show here's what this is, right? But focus on the local side of it and building the adoption in that locale. I think that's quite the idea.
Focus on diversity and inclusion.
That's so funny.
I think it's true. Like, as a New Zealander, we're kind of in this interesting position where, it's a very Western kind of culture, but we're somewhere in between Europe and America, right? So if you're European, you're kind of biased and polarized to a European way of doing things. Americans the other, and we're somewhat in the middle, right? So we see them both from different angles, and there's pros and cons from both. And I'm sure I'm going to offend some American people saying this, but I'm just going to say it is like European conferences are 1,000 times fucking better than American ones. And I've seen almost none that I feel like really did a good. I mean, I think something like TabConf does it well, but I think technical conferences are a slightly different kind of thing, right?
Different beast.
It's all there about technology, but if you're trying to do something where people talking about more general people stuff, right? American things is just all about money, all about being loud, and there's just no soul, right? As I feel with those things, they're like big and commercial and plastic, no soul. And I feel like Europeans just seem to be able to do that much better. Sorry to any Americans watching this, but that's been my impression.
Well, and Honeybadger clearly has the soul, and I mean, I like the local adoption thing. That's not a dig. It's just about what they've decided to focus on. So it's I think I hope this conference I'll be attending every year. So.
Yeah, and that's why I love to see so many Americans over in Europe. Like this last year, first of all, Madeira, a ton of Americans came over. Both speakers and attendees, and also Prague and here. Like you have quite a few here too, and and quite a few high level ones, and it's good to have them here to give them a taste of what this is like.
Yeah, and just to like spread it around. I mean, to me, I'm a guy that likes to have a drink and hang out with people and things like that. So it's a big party, really, a conference in a lot of ways. And so I mean, I think I enjoy that element of it. But again, I think there's just so much value in, we all talk online stuff, and I see what you're writing to someone else and things like that. But to be able to humanize and talk to some of these people, and some of them you meet them and you realize, oh, this guy isn't actually such a dickhead after all. Like he's, or the opposite, right? This person that you think is really high integrity or whatever, and you meet them, you're like, man, this person, I have a very bad feeling about this kind of person, right? So I think that's a very important thing. Is like, I mean, sure, if you're a casual participant, maybe a conference ticket is expensive as it is, let alone flying to somewhere else. But if you're really meshed in this world, I think you owe it on yourself to go out and like physically meet people. And there's just such a value in that, which is difficult to articulate,
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned before, like it's hard to find new ideas and new new angles to view this. I mean, I had writer's block for the longest time before starting the new book, and before I had ideas good enough to pursue.
Yeah,
and it's getting increasingly harder with each book, of course, because there's so many times you can say the same thing. Right?
I know the feeling of like like I'm thinking about, because I've been invited, as I've been told, to speak here every year, and so I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to talk about next year? I'm like, oh man, like, let's do 2 or 3 things, right? It's like, to avoid just repeating it or slightly changing or more or less saying the same thing. It's like, it's a big ask to do. But I mean, I think that also is a way of rather than you or I thinking that we've got to write the whole story ourselves and it's on you to like come up with new ideas for 10 years in a row. It's more like you have your little thing and it's best just like hone that message really, really well. And this is how I feel about it. Is I used to think with conferences, no, I never want to give the same talk twice. I want to do it, once and something. Every time has to be something new. But I kind of realized after doing a bunch of them, is like, well, most people aren't going to see you talk anyway, all right? Or they're not going to, take the time to, or they're not going to appreciate in the moment that it was right then, right? And there's a real value, not just for you personally in terms of like when you give a talk once, it's probably going to be better the 3rd or 4th or 5th time that you give it, right? But there's also value to repeating the same message, right? Which to me almost felt like false or a cop-out. But no, I think now, after doing it a while, there's actually something to be done with that. We just take one small thing and focus on that small area and don't try and be like completely reinventing yourself. Like tomorrow you're going to be talking about some weird economics and then how Bitcoin is art or something, I mean, like just take one thing and build your little and focus around that and really, really hone that particular message. Because like what we've done with the economic stuff, right? I think we've really steel-manned that idea, and there's just any objection that someone could have about the money stuff, someone has written just the best thing and you just like, bam, and you have an answer to every question. There's real value for us as a community at doing that, but that just comes from a small amount of people doing focus work on one particular thing. So
it's funny, as that reminds me of comedians. I mean, comedians are like some of the most visible people on podcasts and stuff because for some reason people like to listen to funny people be funny or something like that. But it's funny. But you hear about their process of literally going around and touring and working on their jokes and stuff like that. The same ones, they don't do a new act every night, they work on it and then eventually they record it and everything, and then that's it. That's actually not a bad model for this type of talk.
Good analogy, right? I mean, like you can't tell the same joke for 10 years, but you wouldn't want to try and rewrite a whole new set, like half an hour comedy skit trying to write some of these talks is maybe I'm just a moron, right? But trying to write some of these talks it takes months, right? And when I do it, I've just got to like pretty much memorize half an hour of stuff and then practice it so it becomes more natural. But I mean, like, dude, trying to do that, if I was trying to do this like 6 times a year, I stick to like 3 because it's too much for me, right? But imagine trying to do it 6 times a year. You just can't do that alone unless you're full-time working on it. So, there's lots of reasons why I think just one small thing repeated, it actually has some value.
Yeah. Now, and do you think there are any like narratives around Bitcoin or thoughts around it that are actually dangerous? Like the people are on the wrong track?
I mean, like the stuff I talked about before, right? Where I think the message is being diluted and it's dangerous, and that like the analogy which I was supposed to make in this talk, but actually kind of like as you do, skip over or like move around some things you're going to say, but you didn't say. I think like the real risk to me is that if we don't change people's view on what technology is, like people want something that's familiar, they want to recreate what they know. It's just human nature, right? And so for you as a business owner or someone that's creating something and trying to get more Bitcoiners on board, which I think there's maybe a little too much emphasis on, is just more people in the door so number can go up. The more you do that, the more people try to make it understandable and relatable by people, so they make it more like what it already is. And by making it more like what it already is, the whole idea about Bitcoin is changing what it already is in terms of money and things like that. I think the risk that we run is like recreating the existing financial system with an orange coat of paint, right? The same thing, but just with different words, different wardrobe change, right? So I think that's probably to me is the most dangerous thing, where I know I'm someone that's like very much the privacy, freedom, self-custodial kind of thing and very anti-KYC, all this kind of stuff. But, having worked at companies like this, I understand why these things are necessary. And there is also an argument why you would say, well, sure, it's KYC, but if a lot of people buy Bitcoin, it doesn't matter if it's KYC because we've defunded the government. Yeah. So there is there's a middle ground here to be found. But I think probably that's what I'm getting to. The real point is like a nuance, right? Somewhere in between those two polarized things, there's the right way to do it. And it's probably not going to be universal in all situations what it is. But there's just a real lack of how would we say, intellectual rigorousness in the space, right? I think to me, the best book on Bitcoin is Eric Voskill's Crypto Economics, because I largely agree with almost everything he says. Not everyone does. But I don't think that you can argue that is the most rigorous, comprehensive body of work about this is what Bitcoin is and this is how it functions. These axiomatic truths, as he describes it. It's a whole system that all links together. And to return to the religion talk I gave last year, it's if you look at Christianity, right? You have baptism, Catholicism, Protestantism, all these kind of things, right? And they're so detailed. It's because in Ephesians 12:16. Jesus said this or that or whatever, you should only wear a red shirt on Tuesdays or something like that. It's that level of detail of they've thought about every aspect of the Bible and what this should mean, and they have this detailed view. And I think there's a lot of value for that because, as I said, there are many different views in this spectrum about what works for Bitcoin. And I think we win by having this marketplace of ideas, but we don't win if they're very poorly fleshed out ideas and they're very kind of naive or immature. They win by all these different schools of thought having the most rigorous, intense, deep body of work to help explain and understand why you should look at Bitcoin from this angle or see it this way, or why it should be done this way.
You're the second person this week to say crypto economics.
It's just crazy. Book, it's not more. I mean, it's a pretty dense book, right? It's not for a beginner's book. No, but it's crazy that it's not bigger in my mind.
Someone should write a noob version of that.
Yeah, that's very much so.
Well, I mean, but this is the thing, right? It's rigorous because I think why I really like it as well is it's the only book that goes that level of depth and is thick and is really deep on this kind of stuff. And the whole point is and you see Eric on Twitter. He's such a pedantic motherfucker about tracking someone down about the way they say particular words because it matters, right? It does matter, right? These loose definitions of what you think this word means and what I think it means. Makes me think that we're talking the same language, but actually I haven't communicated to you effectively what is inside my brain, right? And so this level of detail is really important for something like Bitcoin because imagine you're navigating and you say, oh, it's that way 100 meters, that's fine. But if it's 300 kilometers, you can end up in a very different place than if you said these grid coordinates, this GPS coordinates, stuff like that. So specificity is really, really important, and language is the map. The navigation system we use to arrive at a distance in an idea in the future. And so I think there's value to that.
Yeah, and I think this is Human Action by Ludwig von Mises is dense and very meticulously written for the exact same reason, right? You need this rigorous thing. And I know from writing a smaller book on praxeology, it's really hard because you have to be very, very careful with your words to get it right. Which is why I like you. Writing something like the Investor Clown World more because I can be more expressive,
Yeah. Man, I've thought about doing the book thing, or maybe one day I will, but I'm oh man, I can't imagine what you have to go through to produce something of this size, which is not the largest book. Wow. I have to really say the hats off to you people that write a book, right? Because like I said, I've thought about it, but when I've looked at what's involved, I'm well,
send us a DM and we'll help you.
Yeah. Maybe they will come about. I need to write more. I mean, this is the way they say you do it, right? Is you write a bunch of articles and then you turn the articles into a book, right? So I've kind of thought about maybe I can go down this road, but I'll see.
Looking forward to it.
Yes.
Knut, what are you doing over there?
I'm stamping my seed. Everyone tells me I should. That it's good for Bitcoin security and whatnot, and that I should go balls deep into Bitcoin security. So I'm stamping.
No, you don't do it like that, Knut. You don't stamp that seed. You stamp your seed phrase.
What?
Your seed phrase.
Oh, so that's what these things are for. All of this stuff that they sent me. I get it now.
That's exactly right, Knut. And you can get everything you need to stamp your seed phrase at stampseed.com. And be sure to check out our limited edition Everything Divided by 21 Million titanium seed plate. And use code Infinity at checkout for 15% off.
That's fantastic. And it hurts way less.
This show is brought to you by the Bitcoin Advisor, your premier destination for professional Bitcoin management.
Yeah, so if you want help with your Bitcoin inheritance planning or anything like that, you can call us or send us a DM because we're Bitcoin advisors.
Exactly. They've been serving Bitcoin clients since 2016, and they offer a top-notch Bitcoin concierge service, including collaborative custody and estate planning. We're on the Bitcoin Advisor team ourselves because we believe 100% in what they're doing, and we're happy to tell you more about the Bitcoin Advisor on a call.
So check out the bitcoinadvisor.com or just simply shoot us a DM for some Bitcoin advice. Hey, dear listener, don't forget to like, subscribe, and brush your teeth.
And if you're enjoying the show, the best way you can help us out is spreading the word on your favorite social media platform. Ours is Nostr. The show is going Nostr first, posting the episodes on Nostr 1 day early. And if you'd like to support the show, the easiest way to do that is to send us a zap on Nostr, use a value for value podcasting app to send us a boost, or pick something up from the Bitcoin Affinity store. We appreciate the support.
Yeah, go click like, go click subscribe, and go brush your teeth now.
So what do you think of Nostr? The combination of this Nostr Riga and Honeybadger. First of all, it was a brilliant move, I think, to attach the two together. There's talk that the next time they'll do that is they'll attach it to Oslo Freedom Forum, which is also a very good idea, a different angle, but very good idea. But Nostr and Bitcoin are becoming really intertwined these days. Many applications that were Bitcoin applications have now also become Nostr applications. And what do you see Nostr in the space here?
Difficult for me to say because I've really wanted to sit down and really take my head technically around Nostr, and I haven't, right? I understand basically how it works, but as far as there's some critiques on Nostr, which I would like to have a more informed opinion on than I do. And I know Peter Todd reasonably well, and last night I was saying basically, okay, just tell me, tell me what the things is. So at least when I get to look at this, I've got, because he's kind of anti a lot of aspects of it, right? He thinks it doesn't work. So based on that, like I said, it's not a nuanced, informed opinion, but I think my concern perhaps is that it's actually not that good a protocol on the base level for certain things, its ability to deliver decentralized Twitter, all the millions of applications we have a month in Nostr at scale is going to be possible. And again, I can't say one way or the other, but that's my concern about it. And one thing that, returning to what I was talking earlier about the subcultures and things like that, fortunately in the Bitcoin space, I think we've got a little tendency to be overly supportive and overly passionate. And I think that's definitely preferable to the alternative, right? You want this space to be something where people come from the outside and they feel like this is full of energy and love and happiness and good times and smiles. That draws people in. And if it's the opposite and people are too cynical or bitter or tough, right, it's not going to pull more people into the space is what we need. But again, I think there's a bit of a lack in the space of people who are willing to call out, and say a spade's a spade. There's a problem here. We need to fix this. There's a bit of a lack with that. And that would be the only thing I feel with Nostr is, some people, I was talking to a friend of mine about this before, and he described, he's kind of talking about the conferences thing, but a bit of a circle jerk, right? And my only concern that I see as an outsider with Nostr is that, is this a science project and a bit of a circle jerk where it's something where it's got a tiny amount of people and there's all this energy and noise, but it's all its own self-contained thing, right? Outside this little bubble, no one cares, and it's a bunch of people celebrating how great they are, creating this thing for themselves, thinking it's a tool for the world. So, I think it is great, and I'm really interested in it, primarily from the perspective of what to me is, this is kind of what my talk was about today, about Bitcoin as performance art, is that Bitcoin isn't just about money, it's also about telling a story, about showing an alternative narrative to what the governments or corporations give us. And that narrative is about how we can use technology and open source and things like this to create our own better alternatives, and we don't have to use what they tell us they have to use. And so I like Nostr in the sense that it's the artistic inspiration of Bitcoin has created Nostr, right? It's sort of spiritually inspired by Bitcoin. It's a lot of the lessons that we've learned from Bitcoin have been applied to how Nostr is created, right? It's just kind of born off Bitcoin. And so to me, regardless of the reservations or the possible issues like I talked about before, to me what's far more interesting is someone said, look, hey, Bitcoin works really well at providing this decentralized money. How can we take the lessons there and apply that to communication and other things? And I think to me, that is a more important thing is if this can happen to many other technologies, it makes sense, right? In my talk, I talked about the Liberator pistol being as another example of this. And you look at Cody Wilson, he said like, yeah, it was supposed to be a toy gun, a prop gun. It's not something that you really think it's going to be like an AR-15, but that wasn't the whole point. The whole idea is here's something where it's going to get all over the news and the media, and people are going to start talking about and thinking, the wheels start turning their head and 3D printing and code, man, like it's going to be impossible for governments to stop all this kind of stuff. And when people start thinking about that, the world starts changing, right? So I think Bitcoin is amazing money and it's going to change the financial system, but perhaps what is better is that it gets people thinking of, wow, we create our own money. What other stuff can we create if we all work together and have a vision for the future, right? And so to me, that's, in some sense, like if Bitcoin failed as a money, but it did that, I think that would be a better victory than it not doing that and just being sound money, right? So that's I think is an important part of Nostr, and what I really look forward to with that is how that dynamic plays out.
Yeah, I think I've observed a correlation between disagreeableness and how early you were to Bitcoin. So like the first couple of years, you get your Voskuils and your Cavallos and whatnot. And the further you go down the line, it isn't until like 2021 you get your Joe Halls and your nice people, right? So what do you, and I think the thing that enables the happy people 10 years down the line is that the disagreeable people were so rigorous in the beginning. So you get the don't trust, verify, and then it builds in layers. And the happy people can join on the layers on top later on.
Yeah.
So have you? What's your thoughts?
I mean, I think you're totally right with that. I'd agree, and it kind of speaks somewhat. I mean, I don't think this is really a problem, but it's a little bit of a tragedy of the commons problem in Bitcoin, right? Where, exactly you said, the people that are doing like open source development is perhaps the best example, right? If we don't have like very smart, talented people working full time on Bitcoin. Even if you think it's like can be ossified, like just if you understand software, right, there's just this maintenance process that needs to happen. And there's not someone keeping a close eye on that. It's very easy for Bitcoin to break or to fall apart, right? And so, but here's these people, but there's no business model for open source development or maintaining Bitcoin core, right? There's no way. I mean, the whole idea of Bitcoin is that should never be a revenue generative process as it is, right? So we need to think of an alternative model because it's all in our interests for Bitcoin to succeed. But we can't just create a business and let it self-perpetuate itself. We've got to come up with a different model of how we can do that, right? So, there's a little bit of all of us are like free riding on the work of open source developers in that sense, right? And I think there's a little bit of that when it comes to all these happy, joyous kind of people, and that like, I think a lot of them, particularly if you've been here for a short amount of time, I think a lot of people have kind of like stars in their eyes or their rose-tinted glasses on about like, one thing I would definitely say at the moment, and I've obviously just finished up working for a company in the Bitcoin space, is that there's a lot of people. I think the idea of a Bitcoin scam is a relatively new thing that people aren't looking at. If you're charging $7,000 to have a Art of Alpha male retreat, because this guy is associated with Bitcoin. That's a scam. That's a fucking scam. As far as, I mean, like, hey, maybe it's being honest, marketed honestly, but I mean, let's look at what's happening here. It's association with Bitcoin. There's the things like, I like Bitcoin, buy my shitcoin, is like, I like Bitcoin, buy my other thing. Like, it's the next level. And so
why is that a scam though?
Well, I think it's a scam in that, like, if you look at let's take that particular example there. If you look at the pricing of the resort that was involved, the tickets are like twice the price, right? I mean, there isn't the eye of the beholder, right? If you feel you're getting value and you're happy to pay that thing, I mean, it's not a scam, but I mean, come on. Like, there's other examples taking that particular person where, there are things where people are, or, I think you see this a lot where people are like, here is, sound food or sound diet or like open source this or that, right? Where it's not a scam, but you can see how this like Bitcoin as a lifestyle brand is being created, right? And people are trying to market things which really have nothing to do with Bitcoin. And again, it's not, maybe they're saying this is Bitcoin, but I feel that there is a lot of people using that as a way to charge an overpriced price for an undervalued service, right? And so that's something which I see kind of creeping into the space, is a bit of that sociopath kind of behavior, right? And I think that's a bit of a risk.
Yeah, the question is where do you draw the line though? Like an overpriced thing, totally is it really overpriced if people are willing to pay the price?
Yeah. Like, I mean, you're correct, right? Now, I think like coming back to what I was saying about this is all a factor of, as Bitcoin gets bigger, you'll see more and more of this and it'll become more and more of a thing. and you're right, like what is the line? Like if people are willing to pay for this and they're happy and they don't feel like they're getting scammed, I mean, is it a scam? And I just think it's like, how is this related to Bitcoin, right? And there's many other things out there in the world that use like for example, ethical food or, all this kind of stuff, where they associate with something where really, if you really were wanting to support this cause, you'd be better to directly donate to this thing, right? But they try and create this association to brand themselves, right? And as I said, it's not direct, but I mean, I think most people, if you explain this, they get what I'm leading to and they understand the problem, right?
But it's like quantum this and that,
Yeah. It's I mean, it's a difficult one to discuss, but I mean, this is obvious, right? With anything, as it grows, like all the other stuff I talked about, like the scams are obvious. And as they get bigger, the things are harder and harder to directly say it is. And you can feel something is right off and wrong and not quite right, but it's a lot harder for you to articulate and nail it down. I mean, this is the way all things go, right? As the bigger and the larger, more socially complex it gets, the more involved the scams, if we're going to call them scams, get. And that would be what I think.
No, I mean the tough part about you kind of finding that, and actually this is a good example in this case, because Rob brought a lot of people into Bitcoin with particularly his Sailor series, and actually my first real touch point with like a real Bitcoiner was him on Lex Friedman. Literally, that was my first Bitcoin maxi actually go down the rabbit hole thing. And people coming into the space, I had no idea about the BitClout stuff, like zero idea about the BitClout stuff. And so then I have no idea that he's got this reputation under the hood that isn't there, And so it's hard for people coming into the space to, I guess, to understand who is the right people, and people with influence. Influencers is the correct word here.
Yeah,
are regarded highly, and they're what they put out into the world by people who are new to the space is it's important to get the right message out there,
And I think you have to judge people from their, like, are they a net benefit or a net detriment? Like that's the key. Like, but it's tricky sometimes because people are a bit of both. Of course they are. Like, and I think to some extent, sort of everyone is guilty of that. Like,
And I agree. And it's a great point, right? The guy has like a large reach, and there are many such people right in the space where, in my personal opinion, it's just garbage trash. People that are associate themselves with Bitcoin, but they can't actually talk in any sort of detail or articulation about what Bitcoin really is, right? But they're being presented as experts, and these are the megaphones that people are hearing, right? And so, like there is an element of it comes back to the same stuff as we talked about before, like getting more people in the door is obviously, I think, a benefit, but at what point do you dilute the message such where, let's take the Miami or Nashville conference as an example. How many hours of talks are going on there, and how many of them are really adding value, and how many of them more just like, here is a face, and where this face brings people in the door, but what they said was just audio, right? Was garbage. And with that, I mean, if you ask me, these people should be listening to Eric Voskuil and reading crypto economics, which they're not going to do. But I feel like there is a duty of stewardship from all of us to try and steer in that right direction. Part of that is calling out things which I think are clearly unaligned, right?
Yeah, but there's a devil's argument to be made here too, because arguably Bitcoin conferences in general have become more high signal over time. Like in 2017, you had there were no real Bitcoin conferences. There were just these blockchain bullshit thingies. So from a certain point of view, it is getting like the signal to noise ratio is getting higher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a hard, and this is, I mean, the fact that we're discussing this, I think, is like the beauty, right? Is like, I have heard very few people having these conversations, maybe like kind of leading around this point, but not directly discussing this as like analytically, objectively as a social phenomena, right?
No, it's great.
And like, maybe you're totally right and I'm totally wrong, right? Like these people I should just stop being such a negative Nancy. And these people are good for things, right? But we need to have this discussion and decide and better articulate what this happy medium between the two is, right? And that's the thing which I think is missing. And simply by having this conversation, discussing this stuff, getting out and getting more nuanced, I think is part of getting the job done, right? When if maybe next time Robert Breedloves does his Art of Alpha 2, I'm going to be like, Well, actually, when I look at it, it's a benefit because we had this conversation, right?
Yeah, the sequel is obviously going to be a name Art of the Beta. Yeah. Anyway, I think it's a great discussion, and it's like people should talk more about this because there is a trade, and I don't think we disagree. I think we're on the same page here. I'm just mostly taking the devil's advocate position to get the debate going, because I think it's very much a subject that should be vocalized more and aired more. Absolutely, because diluting the message is bad, and that is like we talk about ethics and tactics and whatnot with the pod all the time, and like what we agree on and align on so much is like we want. There is nothing more important than integrity. Like I love the Scarface quote. All I have in this world is my word and my balls, and they don't break for no one. And I try to live by that. And like I think, had I ever taken the bag of shitcoins during these last 5 years, I would be nothing at this point. I've seen it so many times over and over again. People turning from intellectuals to ultimate fighters, for instance, with the same moustache. Yeah.
I mean, and it's, to me, it's crazy. I've thought the exact same thing. It's crazy where, on the one hand, these people talk about Bitcoin as sound money for generations, and this is a 1,000-year mission, and they don't see them doing this stuff of like, to me, there's been many times where I thought, like when I started speaking at conferences and things like this, if I really started going deeper on this thing, maybe I could make more of a thing of it or whatever. But I think I want to slowly build my brand in that sense over like 10 years, like do things and do things right. Exactly, dude. It's like all these memes we throw around, but I mean, maybe that speaks to, again, this whole point I keep returning to is like, they're all empty platitudes with people actually not deeply thinking about, having something that can clearly articulate and point out, this isn't a direct contradiction to this, but because the thinking is so sloppy, people don't even realize that they're doing that.
Greed. Like people want the fast buck, and it's like a side effect or like a result of the fiat mindset and the fiat rot in people's brains over so many years.
It blows my mind so much in terms of like, I mean, I guess everyone's got to eat, right? But surely if you got Bitcoin, like you're good, right? If you really believe in Bitcoin, right? Maybe not now, but if you really believe in Bitcoin, then we're all going to be super fucking rich, right? In 10 years or whatever. And so in that 10 years, if you got a little bit more money, it's not going to matter anywhere near as much as like if people knew, if you had that old boys network of the people that are here right now in Bitcoin, and they knew that you were always a trustable person with high integrity for 10 years over all these things. Imagine the value. That is incredible value, right?
No. It's like honesty and integrity are really, that's really the currency of the future. And I think that aligns with Bitcoin so well because it is this base layer of truth. It's actually integrity quantified, if you will. Yeah. So it aligns so well. And I think that, reputation is everything, and it's all tied to authenticity and integrity.
We agree.
Well, and I mean, first of all, the one thing is that's the Nostr thing there as well, the web of trust idea. I mean,
absolutely.
Implementation stuff is that's valid. Like if we've had our own concerns about the architecture and haven't really talked to any hardcore skeptics that actually have thought about this hard. But still, the web of trust thing is amazing in terms of this portable web of trust that you can take from application to application and hold on to that. And so, I mean, I think that's just going to amplify that effect. But my other comment from earlier was the talk I did at Noob Day was basically just leaning into Bitcoin, how to do it. Because for me, I've been in the space 2 years, and so much has just happened from saying yes to stuff and putting in the work. And I'm not tooting my horn too hard when I'm saying that, but the point about it is just like do the work, like you say. And I mean, things can happen a lot faster than you think.
And there are no shortcuts.
Exactly, just by having the integrity and doing the work with people.
Yeah, and you can't just cling on to this or that influencer's ideas. That doesn't work. You need to actually study the thing and
play your heroes.
Yeah, I mean, I again, something I talked about in the talk that I did today is like the whole idea of what Bitcoin is like a different philosophy around technology, right? We have the systems view of technology and the tools view of technology. Is technology a system whereby you follow like a or at least a recipe or a set of instructions, and the software does everything for you, and it's like pressing a button and getting something out the other end, right? And that has its place, but I mean, I think Bitcoin is a different type of technology in that it requires like you to learn to wield it, to understand it. The value is in the time and energy that you have to invest to learn about it. Because if you don't learn it, then someone else is making these decisions for you. And the whole point of Bitcoin is to educate yourself and master it, right? An analogy might be, hundreds of years ago, slightly a romanticized example, but nonetheless, I think that the metaphor is there. That hundreds of years ago, like to be able to kill someone, like to be a knight or whatever, you had to spend a long amount of time learning how to master a sword, right? And what would work for you is would exactly work for me. It's about your body, stuff, and
you would probably have to practice less, right?
But I mean, it's all about your understanding yourself, right? And you're never going to be a better swordsman. I'm never going to be a better swordsman than you if I don't really understand myself and then to project myself through the sword, right? Now today, any moron in an hour can learn how to have a rifle and shoot people. And I think again, it's somewhat romanticized, but I still think there's a good amount of truth to this. And that, like, I think we are in a much worse position by having the power to kill given to anyone who knows how to work a very simple machine versus that being reserved to people that go through the work and therefore learn to master themselves and understand themselves. There's a degree of, you're never going to be able to kill people unless you're able to pass these personal tests and verse the effort, right? And I think the same thing should apply to technologies like Bitcoin, like with our money, right? Because when you don't do that, you're just the blindness, follow someone else's instructions. But when you actually have to sit down and learn, there is value to making people go through that process. And so I think like the whole idea of Bitcoin is that it should be a little complicated and a little hard, and you shouldn't try and dumb it down too much, because there's a certain point where it kind of kills what the whole point of Bitcoin is, which is to go through that kind of process. And we will have a better world if everyone understands how to use Bitcoin. But again, imagine it's 10 people in the world are the only people that really understand Bitcoin, and everyone else is just using Binance or something like that. Are we any better than we are now? I don't think we are. So the whole point is making sure that everyone in the world, or a much greater amount of people in the world, are the people who are able to be the banks and the PayPals and the things like that. And if you don't like it, you can easily make your own PayPal like this, right? And I think that's the value of it. And part of that is forcing people to be responsible and to learn themselves. And if they don't go through that, we don't change anything. So it's a counterpoint.
Are you familiar with the word coddywampling? This is a word that our friend Ralphie told us in Prague. And the definition is to purposefully travel without any particular destination, possibly meandering. And someone asked people on Twitter to describe Bitcoin with one word, and I think that's a perfect word. It's coddywampling. It's purposeful, but you don't know where it leads.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's like these are all these, and now the journey is the destination, all this kind of stuff. But I mean, I think there is value. There's truth to that with Bitcoin, right? Yeah.
Rigel, this has been a great discussion.
Likewise.
Lively. I think. What do you have anything else big on your mind that you're excited to talk about or share?
No. I mean, no. That's pretty much it. Like, this has been a really good talk, and I feel like I don't listen to too many Bitcoin podcasts these days, but I feel like I don't think these sort of conversations are being had about these sort of things, and I just thank you for giving me the opportunity to hopefully whoever's watching this has felt similar value from it. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about these things with you guys, because they've been great counterpoints as well. So,
pleasure is on our side. Like, right back at you.
Thank you.
So anyway, would you want to send our listeners? Like,
no, just I'm on Twitter and Telegram if you want to get me directly on CoinSureNZ.
Telegram.
Yeah.
That's another topic
today,
we could have gone into.
Trying to remember what my just added the thing in Signal. But anyway, you can get my Signal if you message me there. And my Nostr, I believe, is on there as well. And if not, I'm sure you can find me through things on Nostr there. I'd tell you my MPub, but that's a little messy to say on a podcast.
We make that joke sometimes. Oh, you're not going to tell us your MPub? Anyway.
Anyway, you're going to get a book. I mean,
thank you so much.
Order the book now within 2 weeks and get a free set of steak knives, maybe. And thank you, Rigel, for coming on to the Bitcoin Infinity show.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
This has been the Bitcoin Infinity show. Thank you for listening.